Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Profluence Sports. Got my man Pete here, bringing it back. I hit him up. We're putting together a piece that you'll all see, probably already have read about is youth sports in a hype cycle. So I wanted to bring Pete in to just go a little bit deeper. So not to throw you into the deep water right from the start, but maybe it's a good place to start, or you want to give updates on TeamSnap or where you guys are at, or give people context. But I think most people, at least listening, will know who you are and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, sure. And Andrew, thanks for having me back on and for putting me in the lucky hot seat to help answer the question. Look, do I think it's in a hype cycle? The answer is a resounding no. Although there is definitely a lot of noise that's growing in the space, right? I think you have some incredible businesses, both in terms of, where TeamSnap is focused and call that more in the sports tech lane where, traditional fundamentals of software investment are focused. There's a lot of strong assets that help to look or help to justify future growth and are really showing the growth trajectory of whether it be SaaS, whether it be fintech, whether it be consumer businesses that continue to gain scale, right? And on the programming front, kind of those that are providing much more of the clubs, the league, the activities that are going on the field, whether that be from a sport perspective, travel tournaments, etc. There's a big delineation, right, between those types of businesses and TeamSnap's lane continues to be on that sports tech side, but the reality is, especially as we're talking about kids being on the field, on the rinks, on the courts, as you have more investment coming in that potentially influence that, there is definitely a lot of noise, rightfully, frankly, that should be created on, is this the best thing for the quality of programming and the experience that our young children are going to have and that young sport families are going through?
Yeah, we'll stick on the tech side for now, but there's obviously the whole programming side, and you're seeing a lot of capital hit that as well, which you're not as close to. But we have several members, even of Profluence, Kyle from Unrivaled, and he's leading their M&A. He was just in, and we were talking about some of this stuff. But on the tech side, like some of the biggest companies within sports or sports tech they all live within youth sports to begin with. Do you see that continuing? Do you
Yeah.
see like sports tech? Like, I just want to even go a little broader. Like, do you see sports tech as a whole having other applications that can make it, or like it just feels like when you hear sports tech, it's like it automatically goes to youth sports these days?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the valuations of things that have traded over the last couple of years, right, that does become a big focus. But relative to a lot of the public companies that are moving, I mean, I think Drake Star announced it was over $52 billion in deal valuations done in 2024, or maybe the first half of 25. But then you kind of back out, it's only a couple billion when you look at actual youth sports tech. Right. And so the reach of youth sports, our estimates, you've got 75 million kids under the age of 18, 50 to 60 million of them playing youth sports. You layer in kind of the parents, the families, the volunteers, the league operators. It is a space that the reality is the industrial complex of youth sports is hitting upwards of half the US. And we're not even talking about it on a global scale. So again, rightfully, I think it's getting that level of focus. And from our perspective, there are a handful of businesses that have the scale, have the maturity, and have the potential growth trajectory to be set up to win. And we believe TeamSnap's sitting on the top of that list, and really kind of one of the blue chip assets in the space overall. But this isn't a market that's easy to crack into, right? I've been here now for 4.5, in the space for about 7. And one of the things that I've learned firsthand is, capital does not win in this space, right? It's building trust at a community level, building incredible value, incredible technology, and really being able to leverage more of the grassroots viral expansion that's required when you are looking at the end of the day, building solutions that exist within a community. And those could be communities at scale and maybe aggregated up through governing bodies. But the reality is our technology is touching millions of people on a daily basis. And what's going on in my town is very different than what's going on in the town next door. And you got to be able to balance that as you're looking at the overall growth trajectory and strategy of a tech portfolio.
Yeah, and a lot of these companies, obviously you came in with WAD Capital and private equity money into TeamSnap, or I say obviously, but I'm sometimes too deep in this space. But for people that don't know, that's how it came to be. But TeamSnap itself is, I don't know, 15, 20-year-old company. If you look at a lot of these, the game changers, the huddles, we can keep naming them off. They've been around for some time, right? Do you see sort of like, I guess when you look at, there's really, call it 7 to 10 companies on the tech side that are determining a lot of where this space is headed and going. Do you see them even consolidating further? Do you see, more entrants coming in and actually it gets more crowded? Like, how do you see that sort of playing out now that, this cycle is, it seems like hitting another, or it's reaching another level?
Well, look, we are in a phase right now where not just over the next or the last 12 months, but even the next 12, you could see every major asset that you're referring to potentially either trading, recapping, merging, etc. And that's where, in my mind, this is a space that scale absolutely matters, right? Reach of distribution and the ability for an organization, a software company, to layer in more and more value that can be provided, whether you're sitting on the traditional B2B SaaS embedded payment side of the ledger, or much more consumer oriented mobile technology, or into your streaming media side of the ledger. All of that at the end of the day comes down to how many eyeballs can you get on your software and into your product. And the channel, whether it being through a web solution, whether it's through data that's being shared, ultimately through mobile, that matters, right? And that scale does create a flywheel of growth. And it also creates a competitive moat for, we're probably stretching it with 10. It's probably 7 to 8 in my mind that right now, between the 8 of us, I think we are controlling kind of the path forward in this space overall. And that's not to say there's not going to be new entrants, right? There are already every day new companies that are popping up. But the realities of the TeamSnaps, the league apps, the huddles, the sports engines that have been around 10, 15 years plus, if it was easy and if it's something you crack into overnight, people would have done it already. Right? But the reality of the fragmentation, the seasonality of these businesses, this local kind of bottoms up, grassroots selling motion that you need to refine with more of a top down, whether it be governing body, league, club model, that's a unique market from any perspective of a software business. And, I think it's taking time for everyone to realize that. And many of these newer companies, in all likelihood, become great acquisition targets, right? As you bring into the fold. If I can bring in more value, I'll allow our partnership with League Side or with Mojo Sports, follow-on acquisitions that we did post the Wad Capital acquisition of TeamSnap, we're going to do that because I can take incredible technology that the Mojo Sports team had built or incredible professional partnerships that they established and take that overnight to millions upon millions of people across the US and bringing more value to them. That's the easy 1 + 1 = 3. And when done right, it creates a ton of value. But unfortunately, there's also a number of different case studies of let's go slap together a bunch of businesses. Let's create kind of a cool website that sits on top of them, create a bit of a shell through some single sign-on, and that kind of butchered user experience over time doesn't scale. And you ultimately leave all of your end users just frustrated more than anything else and almost misrepresenting what that value can look like.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the programming side with Unrivaled, and obviously they've done a good job in media because when we think about like people rolling up the facility side, they're the first name that comes to mind, at least for me. And then obviously you have Three Step that's done it for a while. There's a lot going on there externally and internally. Other people, Rocket Youth, have entered the space and started dabbling in clubs and these facilities. How do you see, because there's a lot changing there, do you see that impacting the tech side at all? Do you see the tech side impacting how that plays out? Where do you see sort of the two moving motions where there's a lot of attention in youth sports, like how it sort of plays out here over the next, I don't know, couple of years?
Yeah, look, I think they go hand in hand in terms of the progression of this space as a whole, right? Both the maturity of youth sports as this market that we are continuing to expand upon, but also hand in hand in terms of responsibility and more on the community impact side of what we need to be able to give back to. My bigger question, as you start to look at a lot of the, Buzz and Unrivaled doing an incredible job in terms of their investment. They're clearly, setting the playbook here, but they are expanding outside of just programming, right? And they're bringing more of the real estate, sponsorship, apparel, commerce, like you got to be able to grow the revenue streams. And as much buzz is being created around funds being created left and right, investment firms that want to invest into this youth sports tech space, there is a question of are there enough assets to sustain that? And can the continued growth and scale of the market itself really satisfy the demand of the amount of money that's being raised? That's my big question on the programming side. I think relative to the technology side of the ledger, there are more than enough strong businesses that have the core fundamentals of what you would look at from a maturing software business to be able to continue to grow and sustain that level of investment. And yes, over time, we're already seeing in the past 12 months, like this is a market that's going to continue to consolidate. And that's not a bad thing, right? Consolidation means bringing more value to more people in a much more effective way. And 1 + 1 = 3, 4, 5. that's always a win. But, relative to valuations, it's tough to begin combining technology companies with, call it, programming real estate focused businesses, right? Just multiple different types of multiples, different types of valuations. And while the Unrivaleds and the Youth, Rocket Youth and others are on their growth trajectory, in the grand scheme of like how many millions and millions of people our technology can touch, it's still just a sliver, right? And I think we got to balance that in terms of, where's the hype, where's the noise coming from versus what's the reality in terms of reach on the software side.
And I know this isn't possible. I'm just throwing this out there as a hypothetical. I mean, I guess it is possible, but very unlikely. If one company owned, say, TeamSnap had the whole, take the other 7, 8 out of the mix, like how big is that company? Like, is it a, that's a true, big IPO? That's a, like, what does that even look like? I'm just curious because you don't see in many spaces like 7 major players. Like that just doesn't happen. You usually get, 1 to 3. Usually, you got 2.
Yeah, and look, there is a split between some of the companies we're talking about, right? We mentioned kind of TeamSnap, Sports Engine, League Apps, Game Changer. Like we are very much focused in the youth space. And then, more of the huddles, the play-ons, the teamworks. You start to get into high school, collegiate, professional offerings. And maybe at some point you do have kind of the cradle to professional technology stack. And as more data becomes available, as the need to continue to aggregate that data and be able to provide value back to a maturing athlete through their trajectory, through their course of their career, and especially all the video and the ability to really, both share those memories, share those analytics, share those breakdown. Like you start to see that vertical value chain being established. But I think right now, depending on what numbers you're looking at TAM, we were using 37, 38 billion in terms of the youth sports market. Now I'm seeing 40, 50. I think some of our friends over at League Apps are throwing out 75 billion at this point in terms of market size. Like, the technology angle there probably is in that 20 billion range, right? When you start to look at kind of all things associated with club, league, operator software, all things consumer software, which is really the big growth trajectory. You have all your registration, your commerce, and things that can follow suit there. But, I think we're all coming at the market from different angles. And frankly, that competition is good for our market, both from a perspective of innovation and the amount of value that we as technology providers can bring. And then through also ensuring that we're all competitive on price and that we're balancing the value that we're bringing to whether it be these sports organizations down to the families, and being able to do so at the lowest cost possible in order to help enable the best experiences that these families can have. Because, we're talking on a weekend, you've had tens of millions of families across the US in a rink, on a court, at a field. And we feel really good about our position and being able to be in each one of their pockets through our mobile app and through a extensive portfolio value that we're bringing to them.
And what about from the international side? Like we're talking youth sports. We're talking, let's just call it 37 to 75 billion, wherever it actually ends up being. These estimates are hard. Is that just in the U.S.? Like what international, is that still a massive untapped opportunity, or is the ecosystem just so much different? Or how do we even start to think about that? Because Apple's
Yeah,
all
so
over
look,
the
our
world.
research, when you start to put that at 35, yeah, Andrew, when you start to put that 35 to 40 billion number on the youth sports industry, our research has always pointed and been focused much more in, call it the US, Canada portion of North America. As you start to get into the international youth sport markets, every single country runs in a very different fashion, right? The level of government oversight, involvement, facilitation of programming in many countries, whether it be Australia, Canada, some of the European countries, very different than the fragmentation that we have here in the States. And so when you start to get into, what is the software opportunity potentially in a country like Australia, where the Ministry of Sport there has a far greater level of influence and control as mandated by government policy, you're looking at a handful of potential customers versus tens or hundreds of thousands like we have here in the US. And so you got to balance that as you're starting to look at international. We have our own research. We're continuously looking at what is the right launch pad as we think about more international aspirations down the road. But right now we are laser focused on our core markets of the US and Canada.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. There's the internationals. Scott, co-founder of Provence, was just in Ireland. He was having conversations, and they just had no concept of youth sports whatsoever, which was just pretty eye-opening when he came back and was talking about how they view it. But anyway, that's
Yeah, well,
a problem.
there's the youth sports angle of international expansion, at least for us US based companies. Then there is the how do you run a world-class multinational software business, which is not just saying, hey, I'm going to flip on my software for access in the UK or in India. Like if you're going into a local country with a local offering, such as all of our sports tech companies here in the US have, whether it be TeamSnap or our peers, the approach in which you take to go be successful in that market varies significantly. And that's a statement around your customer experience. It's a statement around all of your account management, your support, the nuances of how software, whether it be B2B or B2C, is procured in different countries and different cultures. That is vastly different. And especially in our space where we're talking about the data and privacy of kids under the age of 13, data jurisdiction across these countries that we're talking about also varies greatly. And whereas data residency is a significant burden on the operations, right? How do you think about data sovereignty relative to more of a complex network and a social network that many of us are starting to scale up? And so there's a lot of complexities there, right? And I know oftentimes global expansion, international expansion is always top of mind for people, but when you get into the reality of what that requires to be successful, that's where I think experience comes into play, right? And whether leadership teams have done that before.
Yeah, that makes sense. And something I just I was going through some of the notes of what else is taking place. So even today, so this will be yesterday for a lot of people listening to this, is Scoreability just raised 40 million, sort of came out of nowhere, took on Bluestone Equity Partners. As people are raising these larger rounds, like there's some other ones that we won't say, at least on this podcast, but that have potential numbers circled. Do you see these as a lot of pure M&A plays, or like where are you going and spending, and take scoreability out of it, but you raise 20 million, you raise 30, you raise 40, you're building in a segment of youth sports. Do you see a lot of that going towards M&A? Like how do you see people even using growth capital, and then from the startup side, and then just to end that, like the private equity side, what are they looking at? What are they seeing? What are they trying to do for people that want to understand that, obviously coming from WAD?
Yeah, look, I can't always talk about other people's strategies, nor what I want to. I'll quickly take everybody through kind of the 4.5 year run that we've been on with TeamSnap, right? We acquired a business and invested in a business with a lot of growth equity come in, because after 6 to 9 months of deep research into this space, I and WAD Capital and ultimately our executive team were very bullish on where we could take what TeamSnap was 4.5 years ago to where it is today and where it's going to be over the coming years. And that was a heavy investment up front in R&D, a heavy investment in rebuilding our go-to-market motions, and turning on somewhat of an M&A spigot, right? We did 2 follow-on acquisitions within the first, call it 30 months of our initial acquisition, and we walked away from probably 50 other assets, right? And to land with those 2. And that's a statement much more around the discipline and the intentionality that we had to stay focused on our core strategy, because this is a space that, as we've talked about, you start to layer on these different revenue streams, you get excited. But the more mature leadership teams that can stay disciplined to what their thesis is and the strategy in which the company is growing, I believe are the ones that are going to be poised the best to go win. And so, like any traditional, or not traditional, but I think any software growth equity play, you're typically looking at a couple different growth levers that are identified, if done right, way before you even start speaking to the business. And doing the level of market research. WAD Capital is a great partner and able to provide a lot of those resources to help us build that level of market intelligence. And when the first time, conversation we had with the founders of TeamSnap back in what I think was August of 2020, we were very well informed. I knew exactly what we were going to do this business and where the growth lever is going to be. And this 5-year B2B2C vision that we've been building and this massive platform that we've been able to continue to scale to connect this ecosystem, that's a statement around the leadership team, and whether it's the one that founded the team or one that's able to take it on to the next chapter, much more than I think where the source of capital is, right? I think we oftentimes get too caught up with, is this VC, is it private equity, is it institutional, is it seed led? Like, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the people that are in the grind day in and day out, and where that company is relative to its maturity scale is much more of a statement of the capital source than anything else.
Yeah, it's well put. That's like the big debate these days, right, of how deploying. But again, at the end of the day, right, capital's going in to go out at a higher level, but it's nothing without the people building these companies. I guess as we sort of round towards the end, I think we hit a lot of the main points. Is there anything else you think, Pete, that we should touch on or is worth calling out or talking about for a few minutes, just to before we round this out at the 25-minute mark?
No, look, I I beat on this drum whenever I can. I think for any of us as service providers, as partners in this community, in this ecosystem of youth sports, it's all of our responsibility to focus on why we're all here. And that's on the kids that are on the field, on the court, at the rinks, on the pitch, like the lifelong lessons that they are able to get. And while this is a significantly rapidly growing market in youth sports relative to all things we've talked about today, we all have influence and ability to direct what does youth sports look like in the next 5 to 10 years. And I know personally the value that I was able to gain playing sports my entire, youth growing up through varsity and high school. And, I don't want to lose that. I've got 3 young boys. I don't want to make sure they have that same level of opportunity. And yes, this is a evolving business. It's just the sheer scale of it provides a lot of opportunity for successful businesses to grow. But let's not lose sight of why we're all here. That's the important part.
Yeah, I love it. That's a perfect way to end it. So Pete, appreciate you coming on. We'll keep these combos going. We've been trying a bunch of different things here at Profluence on the podcast side, from emerging leagues sharing videos of their stuff to, bringing in CEOs like yourself to talk around, hot topics. So anyway, appreciate you sharing. We'll get all the links. People check out TeamSnap and Pete if you haven't already. And we'll see you next time, but appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Keep doing what you're doing, man. Appreciate the research and the perspective that you continue to bring. And, I think you're setting the bar high for everyone that's involved in this space and that's learning about it. So thank you.